Don't you want to try the coffee I made especially for you, honey? Michael's voice was light, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. I sat at Sabrina's elegant dining table, the centerpiece of her pristine Nashville home, where we gathered for our monthly family brunch. The coffee cup in front of me smelled off. Metallic. Wrong. My stomach twisted. My name is Danielle, and at 29, I never thought I'd be questioning whether my own husband was trying to poison me. But after 3 years of marriage, and too many nights spent clutching my stomach in agony after meals with his family, I'd learned to be careful, especially around Sabrina. She had a way of orchestrating disasters that always left me sick or humiliated, always with that same innocent smile Michael was wearing now. I forced a pleasant expression. How thoughtful of you. Sabrina watched me, lazily stirring her untouched coffee. Michael has become quite the barista lately, she mused, smirking. He's been practicing different brewing methods. Just for you. Just for you. The way she emphasized it sent a chill down my spine. Michael had been spending more time here lately, claiming he and Sabrina were planning a surprise for our anniversary. But something was off. The whispered conversations that stopped when I walked in. The text messages he'd quickly turned his screen away from. And now this coffee. I lifted the cup, pretending to take a sip while studying their faces. A glance. A quick, fleeting exchange between them. My stomach turned. I set the cup down and forced a laugh. Oh, would you look at that? I need to make a quick work call. I pushed back my chair. Sabrina, would you mind if I use your study? She waved a hand. Just try not to break anything. I nodded, heart pounding, and walked past her, deliberately stumbling just enough to knock our coffee cups into each other, switching them. I'm such a klutz. I sighed, righting myself. Sabrina smiled tightly. So I've noticed. I hurried away, slipping into the study, but not before positioning myself where I could still see the dining table. And now I waited. Sabrina lifted the cup to her lips. My stomach clenched. Part of me wanted to stop her, to warn her. But I needed the truth. I'd spent too many nights in emergency rooms. Too many hours doubled over in pain, always after meals with them. It hadn't always been like this. When I met Michael at a wedding in Nashville, he was charming, attentive. Sabrina had welcomed me with open arms. But looking back, I saw it all for what it was. The accidental spills. The extra seasoning in my food. The way every illness, every humiliation had come at her hands. And Michael had always been there with an excuse. Maybe it was something you ate earlier. You must be coming down with something. Then came the worst night 2 months ago. A brunch at their house. I woke up in the hospital. The doctors found something in my system. Something unidentifiable. Michael convinced them I must have taken expired medication. And I had started to doubt myself. Until now. Sabrina took a sip. Then another. Michael barely glanced up from his phone. He wasn't worried, because he thought it was me drinking that cup. The metallic scent still clung to the air. I clenched the doorframe as Sabrina's fingers trembled. She set the cup down, her face pale. Michael, she said, her voice wavering. Michael looked up. Something's wrong. First he looked bored, annoyed even. Then realization dawned. His eyes darted to the coffee cup. He froze. Sabrina's hands began to shake violently. She tried to stand, stumbled, gripping the edge of the table for support. Michael, she gasped, panic rising. What did you put in that coffee? Michael shoved back his chair so hard it clattered to the floor. That wasn't supposed to be your cup, he whispered. But the room was so silent everyone heard him. Sabrina's eyes widened. Realization. Fear. Betrayal. Call an ambulance. She choked, sinking to the floor. Please, I can't. I stepped into the dining room, my phone already recording. Michael knelt beside her, his face ashen. Sabrina. But there was nothing he could do. I dialed 911. Emergency services? Yes, we need an ambulance at 1542, Maple Grove Drive. I kept my phone recording as Michael pressed his shaking hands against Sabrina's arms. Too late. I spoke clearly. My sister-in-law is having a severe reaction to something in her coffee. She's conscious but experiencing tremors. I met Michael's eyes. He knew. He knew I knew. The man I married. the man who had tried to kill me. And now he was watching his plan collapse right in front of him. Later, at the police station, Michael was silent. Sabrina was still alive, but barely. And I was done being afraid. The detective folded his arms, glancing between Michael and me. We tested the coffee, he said. There was a lethal dose of, he rattled off something chemical. Had you drank it, you'd be dead within an hour. Michael didn't deny it, didn't even blink. The detective turned to me. Would you like to press charges? I met Michael's cold, empty gaze. And I smiled. Absolutely. Don't you want to try the coffee I made especially for you, honey? Michael's voice was light, almost playful, but his smile was wrong. It didn't reach his eyes. I sat at Sabrina's pristine dining table, my untouched coffee cup in front of me, its metallic scent still clinging to the air. Across from me, Sabrina stirred her own coffee. Slowly, deliberately. Michael has become quite the barista lately, she mused, her lips curling at the edges. He's been practicing different brewing methods. Just for you. Just for me. The words sent a chill through my spine. I lifted the cup, pretending to sip while studying them both. A glance. A quick, barely there exchange between them. My stomach twisted. I set the cup down. Oh, would you look at that? I need to take a quick call for work. I pushed back my chair, knocking against the table. Just enough to send our coffee cups sliding into each other. Switching them. I'm such a klutz. I sighed, brushing imaginary dust off my dress. Sabrina's smile tightened. So I've noticed. I nodded, heart hammering, and slipped into the study, just far enough to watch. And now I waited. Truth in a sip. Sabrina lifted the cup to her lips. A small sip. Then another. My stomach clenched. Part of me wanted to stop her. To scream, to demand answers. But I needed the truth. After 3 years of unexplained illnesses, emergency room visits, and conveniently ruined career opportunities, I needed to know. Sabrina set the cup down. Her fingers trembled. Michael, she whispered. He barely looked up from his phone. Something's wrong. First he didn't react. Then realization struck. His head snapped up. His gaze darted to the cup in her hand. And he froze. Sabrina, what's happening? His voice wasn't frantic. Not yet. But he knew. That wasn't supposed to. His voice trailed off. Sabrina's body jerked forward, her hand gripping the edge of the table. A sharp, shallow breath. Michael. Her voice cracked. What did you put in that coffee? Michael shot up from his chair, sending it clattering to the floor. That wasn't supposed to be your cup. But the room was so silent, everyone heard it. Sabrina's eyes widened in horror. Call an ambulance, she gasped. Please, she collapsed. Confessions in Chaos Emergency Services? Yes, we need an ambulance at 1542 Maple Grove Drive. I said, my voice calm. Too calm for the storm breaking loose around me. Sabrina was on the floor, shaking, her face pale as death. Michael knelt beside her, his hands shaking. This wasn't supposed to. Shut up, Michael. Sabrina spat through clenched teeth, her pain momentarily giving way to rage. This is all your fault. His mouth open, closed. He looked at me, then at her. Lost. You said it would just make her sick enough to miss the board meeting next week. Sabrina coughed violently. The words hit me like a brick to the chest. The board meeting. The one where I was set to secure a major client contract. The one Sabrina had been fighting for. My voice came out eerily even. The tea last month. Sabrina grimaced in pain. The breakfast 2 months ago. Michael's eyes flickered. Those weren't accidents, were they? Sabrina let out a strained, bitter laugh. The tea was supposed to keep you home during the Johnson contract presentation. I barely felt my own breath. But you went anyway. She clutched her stomach, convulsing. Michael said, she gasped. We just needed to discredit you. Make clients think you were unreliable. Sirens screamed outside. Michael took a step back. Sabrina, stop talking. She glared at him, her face twisted in fury. We've been planning this for months, she snapped. Months. Every hospital visit. Every ruined opportunity. All of it. My hands tightened around my phone. I had been right. I had been right all along. Paramedics burst through the door. I stepped aside, letting them work. But I didn't stop recording. Not until I sent the file to my private email. And then to my lawyer. Michael stood frozen, watching as his entire plan crumbled before him. I walked forward, my voice firm. I'll ride with her to the hospital. Michael blinked. What? I met his eyes. After all, I need to make sure my sister-in-law gets the proper treatment. And then just for him. And I'm sure the doctors will be very interested in knowing exactly what was in that coffee. The hospital. Final pieces falling. The emergency room buzzed with urgency. Sabrina was alive. Barely. I sat in the waiting room, my phone clutched in my hands, replaying the recording. Her trembling voice. Michael's slip-up. All the proof I needed. Family of Sabrina Anderson? I stood. Michael. Gone. Coward. A nurse led me past the double doors. She's stable, but the doctor found concerning levels of toxins in her system. Her expression was grave. Mrs. Bennett, the doctor said, could you tell me exactly what happened? I took a steady breath. I think you should listen to this first. I hit play and watched her face change. This is very serious. The substance we found, it doesn't just end up in coffee by accident. A shuffling sound. I turned. Michael. Sweaty. Pale. He had overheard. Danielle. He started, voice weak. Let me explain. Dear. Carter hit the call button. Security to room 412. Michael's hand shot up. This is all a misunderstanding. I raised my phone. So the text about keeping me out of commission before the Whitmore presentation? That was just friendly conversation. His face drained of color. You went through my phone? After I found the strange pills in your desk drawer? Yes. Yes, I did. The truth was in the open now. I turned to the doctor. I've been hospitalized 3 times in the past 6 months with unexplained symptoms. Her eyes narrowed. We'll need to compare test results. Security arrived. Michael looked trapped. His carefully crafted lies were over. Sabrina and I. He stammered, desperate. We were just trying to help you slow down. You were working too hard. My voice was ice. You tried to kill me. Security grabbed his arms. And for the first time Michael looked afraid. The last thing he saw before they took him away? Me. Smiling. Because I had won. By poisoning me? My voice was steady but my hands shook with rage. Michael didn't answer. That silence was all I needed. Behind him, through the glass window of her hospital room, I could see Sabrina. The earlier bravado, the smug confidence she wore so well, all of it was gone. In its place, raw fear. Dear. Carter's voice was calm but firm. Detective Harris is on her way. She'll need statements from everyone involved. I nodded, exhaling slowly. The truth was finally coming out. There was no going back. The investigation begins. Detective Harris arrived within the hour. Seasoned. Sharp. The kind of investigator who had seen every version of betrayal. She listened intently as I played the recording from brunch, then scanned the text messages I had saved. Finally she looked up, flipping through her notes. Mrs. Bennett, you mentioned previous hospitalizations. Can you walk me through those incidents? I pulled out my phone, opening the document I had been keeping for months. The first time was in February, dinner at Sabrina's house. Severe stomach pains, dizziness. Then April, the tea incident. June, breakfast with them. Same pattern. My voice remained even. Each time, the symptoms were just different enough that the doctors couldn't pinpoint a cause. Detective Harris's expression darkened as she scanned my records. And you've been keeping notes? Ever since I noticed the pattern. I hesitated, then reached into my bag, pulled out another phone. I also started carrying a backup. Her brow lifted slightly. I used it to record conversations when I was around them. I have several where Sabrina and Michael discussed their plans. They were careful, but not careful enough. Played one. Sabrina's voice came through clear as day. The Whitmore account is worth millions, Michael. We can't let her ruin everything we've worked for. Just stick to the plan. Then Michael's voice. Chilling. I've got something stronger this time. She won't make it to the presentation. Detective Harris's grip tightened on her pen. Through the window I saw Sabrina watching us. She knew. She knew she was caught. Dear. Carter stepped forward, her voice grim. The hospital is running toxicology screens. We've already identified several substances that don't occur naturally. We'll also need samples from your home. Before I could respond, a commotion erupted down the hall. Michael, arguing with security, desperate, panicked. I need to speak with my wife. His voice cracked. Danielle, please, you don't understand. We were trying to protect you. Protect me? Detective Harris stepped between us. Mr. Bennett, you're not helping your case. Michael laughed. A sharp, hollow sound. We weren't trying to hurt her. We were just trying to slow her down. She was working herself to death, taking all the major accounts. Sabrina said if we could just make her take some time off. By poisoning her. Detective Harris's voice cut through his excuse like a knife. That's not protection, Mr. Bennett. That's attempted murder. The color drained from Michael's face. Murder? He echoed, almost like he hadn't considered it. No, that's not, we never meant to. I took a step forward, my voice eerily calm. Then tell me, Michael. When you put something in my coffee this morning, what was supposed to happen? Silence. Behind him, Sabrina was still watching. Her face was tight with calculation. Even now, she was trying to figure out an angle, a way to spin this, a way to turn months of systematic poisoning into some misguided, noble act. Detective Harris didn't look away from Michael. We'll need both of their phones. She motioned to the security guards. And I want officers posted at both doors. Nobody leaves until we get the toxicology results. The final blow dur. Carter entered Sabrina's room with a tablet in hand. Her expression was stone cold. Detective Harris and I followed. Michael remained outside, pinned between two guards. Sabrina tried to sit up straighter, but the tremors hadn't fully subsided. Dear. Carter glanced at her chart. Then she spoke. The toxicology report shows elevated levels of several substances. Sabrina blanched. Most concerning, Carter continued, is a compound typically used in pharmaceutical testing. It's not something the general public should have access to. Sabrina's hands clenched the thin hospital blanket. That's impossible. She looked at Michael. Michael said it was just something to cause mild symptoms. Detective Harris didn't miss a beat. Mild symptoms? Like the ones your sister-in-law has been experiencing for the past 6 months. Sabrina shook her head. Denial. Fear. But the door swung open again. Another detective stepped in, holding an evidence bag. We found these in Mr. Bennett's office at Anderson Marketing, he announced. Inside the bag, small bottles, clinical labels, and notes. Detailed, meticulous notes about dosages and reactions. I swayed slightly, my stomach churning. This wasn't an impulsive plan. This was methodical. I think I'm going to be sick, I whispered. Michael's voice came from outside the door. Sabrina and I, he stammered, desperate now. We were just trying to help you slow down. Detective Harris turned to him, her expression stone cold. Mr. Bennett, she said evenly, you weren't trying to help your wife. You were trying to erase her. The words hit like a death sentence. Michael's chest rose and fell rapidly. Sabrina let out a small broken sound. They had lost. And for the first time in years, I felt safe. The end of U.S. security stepped forward. Michael Bennett, one of them said. You're under arrest for attempted murder. Handcuffs clicked around his wrists. His face was ashen. Sabrina? Her head dropped forward. She didn't fight when they took her phone, when they confiscated her medical records. Dear. Carter's voice was the last thing I heard before I walked out of that room. Mrs. Bennett? Would you like us to compare your past blood work to what we found in Sabrina's system? I turned to Detective Harris. Yes. My voice was steady, certain. And I'd like to press charges. Michael's eyes locked onto mine. Pleading. Desperate. But I had no sympathy left to give. I took one last breath, exhaling every doubt, every ounce of fear, every whisper of manipulation that had once kept me in line. Then I turned and walked away. You were documenting everything? Like some kind of experiment. Sabrina flinched at my words, but she didn't deny it. It wasn't like that, she said quickly, but her voice wavered. We just needed to track what worked. The first few attempts weren't effective enough. You kept showing up to meetings anyway. I felt sick. Like a case study. A trial run. A human experiment. Detective Harris turned one of the bottles over in her gloved hands. So you increased the dosages. Her tone was neutral, but there was steel beneath it. Did you know these substances could be lethal in higher concentrations? Silence. Through the window, I saw Michael sink into a chair, his head in his hands. The Whitmore account. It all clicked into place. It wasn't just about that one presentation, was it? My voice was steady, but my heart pounded. You needed me out of the way permanently, because the client specifically requested me as their lead. Sabrina's face contorted with anger, resentment, fear. You were ruining everything, she spat. I built that client portfolio for years, and then you showed up and suddenly, everyone wanted you instead. Her words landed like a slap. Michael said he could fix it. I stared at her. By killing me? The words hung in the air. Thick. Suffocating. Sabrina's lips parted, but Dr. Carter cut in before she could scramble for an excuse. The concentration in the coffee you drank today, the doctor said coolly, was significantly higher than the previous samples we analyzed from Mrs. Bennett's earlier hospital visits. If she had consumed it, the outcome would have been severe. Possibly fatal. Sabrina's face drained of color. Detective Harris turned to the other officer. We'll need a full warrant for both their homes and offices. And get in touch with the pharmaceutical company listed on these bottles. Find out how they got access to these substances. Sabrina slumped against the pillows. Her bravado was gone. Her voice was barely a whisper. It wasn't supposed to go this far, she mumbled. Michael kept saying we just needed one more try. I stepped closer to her bed, hands trembling, but my voice was firm. Every time I got sick, every meeting I missed, every client I lost, you were there, watching, taking notes on how your poison was affecting me. I leaned in. What kind of person does that make you? The silence that followed was deafening. From the hallway, I heard Michael's voice rise in desperation. Danielle, please. Officers were already reading him his rights. I didn't look back. I turned to Detective Harris. I'm ready to make my formal statement now. The trial lasted 3 weeks. But it felt like a lifetime. Every day I sat in the courtroom, watching as the prosecution built their case. The evidence was overwhelming. The bottles from Michael's office. The meticulous records of every poisoning attempt. The recorded conversations. The text messages. I watched Sabrina shrink in her seat. Once the most confident, cutthroat woman in the room, now small and brittle. Michael never looked at me. Dr. Carter's testimony was the final nail in the coffin. The defendants demonstrated a clear escalation, she explained to the jury, walking them through the toxicology reports. This wasn't an impulsive act. It was planned, executed over months, with full knowledge of the harm it would cause. Then came the pharmaceutical company's representative. Michael had stolen the compounds through a college friend who worked in their research department. The prosecutor's closing statement was devastating. This wasn't just corporate sabotage, she told the jury. This was a systematic attempt to destroy Mrs. Bennett, and the escalation of their methods shows clear intent. This should have been fatal. When the verdict was read, I didn't feel victory. I just felt relief. Guilty. Multiple counts. Attempted murder. Conspiracy. The judge's voice echoed through the silent courtroom. The premeditated nature of these actions, carried out against a family member over an extended period, demands the maximum sentence. I watched as they were led away. No one spoke. No one wept for them. Their business, their reputations, their freedom, all sacrificed in their attempt to erase me. 1 year later, I stood at the podium of the Nashville Business Leaders Conference, preparing to give the keynote speech. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was exactly the kind of opportunity Sabrina had tried to keep me from. The Whitmore account, the very deal she and Michael had been willing to kill for, had led to so much more. More clients. More success. More than they ever could have imagined. I took a breath. Success isn't just about talent or hard work, I said, my voice carrying through the auditorium. It's about integrity. About building real relationships, ones based on trust. I let the words settle. Sometimes the biggest threats don't come from competitors. They come from the people closest to us. But surviving those challenges? It makes us stronger. After the speech, young professionals approached me. One woman, bright-eyed, full of ambition, asked how I had kept my composure through it all. I focused on what I could control, I told her. I gathered evidence. I trusted my instincts. And I refused to let fear stop me from moving forward. That night, my phone pinged with an email from the Whitmore client. They were renewing their contract for another 3 years. I smiled, thinking about how differently things could have ended if I hadn't trusted my instincts that day at brunch. That morning, the local paper had run a small article. Michael and Sabrina had begun their prison sentences. I didn't read it. Instead, I turned back to my desk, back to the proposal for my newest client. Because the best revenge wasn't about getting even. It was about moving forward and succeeding. Despite the people who tried to destroy me,